Three people were killed in a suspected terror attack at San Diego's biggest mosque on Monday. The two teenage suspects were found dead nearby with self-inflicted gunshot wounds. Both are said to be Nazi sympathisers, and the FBI is treating it as a hate crime. Many have been quick to draw a direct line between this attack and rising anti-Muslim rhetoric in public life. Republicans in Congress held a meeting on Sharia law just days earlier. Congressman Andy Ogles recently said that Muslims don't belong in American society, while Congressman Randy Fine said he prefers dogs. And the case for the defence was not helped this week by Laura Loomer, a confidant of the US president, who posted that people who go to the mosque want everyone killed. Well, joining me now is Mehdi Hassan, founder of Zeteo. Mehdi, welcome back to Uncensored.
Thanks for having me, Piers. I wish it wasn't under these circumstances.
Yeah, well, me too. There's been a lot of debate, obviously, about anti-Jewish rhetoric and the impacts of that, and incidents, awful incidents in the UK and other places about that. Here we have an attack which appears to have been motivated by a hatred of Muslims and Islam. Do you think it's getting the attention it would get had it been an attack on Jews, for example?
It's a provocative question, Piers. I expect nothing less from you. I'll get in trouble whatever I say. But look, I think that the attacks on synagogues and mosques that we've seen recently are both horrific. Does one group get more coverage than the other? Yes. I don't want to play that as some kind of, it's not that I'm saying that Jewish victims of hate crime should get less coverage, but clearly Muslims are treated as second-class citizens in this country, not just by Republican right-wing politicians like the ones you named, and I can name many more who have said viciously anti-Muslim things, but by the media, by liberal media, by the Democratic Party, by ordinary Americans. And that's a reality. And I think that's the case in the UK as well, Piers, where we just had this rally against Muslims in London, which I know you've covered on your show. And we haven't seen the political establishment come down on that rally in the way they would if Tommy Robinson was saying things about Jews and Judaism in the way he does about Muslims and Islam. I hope we can agree that, unfortunately, Islamophobia has been mainstreamed in America and the UK in a way that, thankfully, anti-Semitism still hasn't, although there has been an alarming rise in anti-Semitism across the political spectrum. On the subject specifically of the mosque and the shooters, you mentioned anti-Muslim. I just want to add here, if you look at the alleged manifestos from these two kids, these two teenagers, God help us that two teenagers carry out this murder, this terrorist attack. If you look at the manifesto, Piers, they're anti-Semitic and Islamophobic. The manifesto has horrific stuff in there about Jews and about Islam as well. So Jonathan Friedland and I wrote a joint piece almost a decade ago pointing out that people who tend to be anti-Semitic also tend to be Islamophobic and vice versa. They're two sides of the same coin.
That's really interesting. I actually bumped into Jonathan Friedland at the Arsenal game the other night, randomly. I would like to have known that. It's a fascinating part of this. So what does that tell you? That extremism of all kinds eventually kind of meets in terms of a lot of the ideology?
Well, I think with a specific type of extremism, which is white nationalists and Nazis, and this is why people like myself have been very careful. I got attacked recently for being skeptical of, the left getting into bed with MTG and Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, precisely for the reason that a lot of lefties admire those people now because they're criticizing Israel. And I worry that how much of that is driven by criticism of Israel, how much by anti-Semitism, how much will Muslims be on the receiving end of the hate once, quote unquote, they're done with, another community. And I just think minority communities need to stick together right now because the far right hate all of us. The people who claim to be white Christian nationalists and who want this country to be a white Christian nation, they don't want any of us here, Jews or Muslims. And it's interesting to read this manifesto, depressing, and see these two kids who were clearly radicalized, red-pilled online. They're kids, for God's sake. They got radicalized online, clearly. They turn up wearing Nazi symbols and SS symbols. The manifesto, and I don't know how authenticated it's been, but this is the manifestos that are attributed to them online, suggest that they hated Jews and Muslims.
So is it necessarily then a political issue? You would, as you have done, you've said that a lot of the rhetoric that comes from these Republican, hard right conservatives has inflamed the mood. But are those two things consistent? Because obviously, if they're being anti-Semitic,
I think they are consistent. No, I think they are consistent because it's all about what atmosphere you create in this country. And there's no denying the fact that since Donald Trump came on the scene in 2015, we now have an atmosphere in this country that is more hate-filled, with more hate crimes, more political violence.
But there's also,
more
many
toxic,
on that.
More violent, more divisive atmosphere.
Right, but in 2025, there was more violence from the far left than there was from the right for the first time in a long time. And I found it incredibly
disturbing. The crucial statement is...
Well, I found, look, I will come to the right part of this, but on the left, what I found increasingly disturbing to watch is the kind of callous inhumanity that a lot on the left show themselves to have when you look at, like, the murder of Charlie Kirk, for example, or the healthcare executive. You know, I saw the front page of the New York Post yesterday with these three appalling women, young women, whose brains were so warped. So they just want to be celebrating the cold-blooded murder of a father and husband in the streets of New York. So what is going on there?
So let me just say two things about that. One is, I'm glad you said for the first time in many years.
Yeah.
Because the reality is that for decades, and even now, right-wing violence is a huge problem in the United States, and people are in denial about this. Many of your guests have come on and just lied about the fact that political violence is not a right-wing problem. Sebastian Gorka, who runs the counterterrorism strategy for this government, just put out an anti-terrorism strategy, Piers, from the Trump administration, which did not mention the far right. It mentioned the left, it mentioned Muslims, it mentioned communists. Antifa doesn't mention the right, which is insane when the majority of violence in this country in the recent years has come from the right. So that's one point. Number two, in terms of the reactions, I know you're not going to like me saying this, but I think the evidence is with me, is that the people you cite, the people who do celebrate murder or say dumb shit or act callously, are a fringe, Piers. When Charlie Kirk was killed, everyone I saw, mainstream leftists, was not celebrating it. And every single Democrat, from Kamala Harris to Joe Biden to every Chuck Schumer, was condemning it, right? And when any kind of political violence happens, mainstream people on the centre-left, whether it's in the Labour Party in the UK or the Democratic Party in the US, called it out. Can I finish my point? Can I finish my point?
But I'm just challenging that one. I would challenge one thing on that. There were university professors, there were doctors, nurses, teachers. There were people in real positions of authority and responsibility that were quite happy to post videos of themselves celebrating Charlie Kirk's murder.
I'm going to dispute that, Piers. No, I'm going to dispute that. If you really want to get into culture, I was there following a lot of this. A lot of the people who were doxxed were not celebrating. They were pointing out that he said horrible things, which is totally a legitimate thing to say. They were not celebrating his death. That was a right-wing propaganda line. But we don't have time to get into each individual case. Can I make my broader point, which is when a mosque is attacked in the US, Republican politicians are either silent. I pointed this out, that Ted Cruz did not condemn it until I called him out on it. Multiple Republicans have still not condemned. Elise Stefanik has not condemned it. She's busy condemning some Democratic candidate in Texas who said something awful. They have not condemned a terrorist attack in the United States. That's one point. You can't find Democrats who do the same when there's a synagogue attack or anything equivalent. And then, of course, there's no one on the Democratic side who's talking like Laura Loomer. There just isn't. Find me one person. Imagine, Piers, I said this on Twitter, imagine if an advisor to Joe Biden, a close friend and ally of Biden, when Biden was president, after a synagogue was attacked, had said the synagogue was evil and that all Jews should be removed from the US. It would have been the end of the Biden presidency. You would have been on a roll loop for 7 days straight. We know this. And yet Republicans get away with this stuff. You mentioned Andy Ogles. It's not just Andy Ogles. It's Representative Brandon Gill, who said Islamic immigration is killing us. Chip Roy, Representative Chip Roy of Texas, who said no more Muslims. He said in March in a tweet. You have, of course, Randy Fine, who you've had on this show, who said mainstream Islam, not Islamism, not jihadism, mainstream Islam is an evil death cult, he said. If you're telling me that doesn't contribute to an atmosphere where people might want to pick up weapons and attack Muslims and mosques, I don't know what to say to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had this debate with Jonathan Conricus yesterday, the former IDF spokesman, because
I saw it.
At the Tommy Robinson march, there were speakers brazenly talking about removing Islam from all aspects of politics and authority in the UK. They weren't saying Islamists or extremists or anything. They were just and of course, you know, Islam is followed by Muslims. They were basically just saying, get the Muslims out. And Jonathan was trying to defend this and happy to say he attended the march and, you know, wasn't fazed by what he heard. And I was like, but imagine if it had been about Jews there. Imagine if they said we're going to get all the Jews out of Parliament, all the Jews out of local level politics in the UK. All hell would have broken loose. Now, conversely...
By the way, can I just add to that, Piers? I'm glad you pushed Jonathan Conricus on that. And you know what he said to you in response? He said, it wasn't about Muslims. It was about Islam, which is this kind of very lazy distinction.
Well, Islamism,
because it's interesting that in the shooters... Well, no, he tried to disrupt in the fact that the speaker who you referenced said Islam and not Muslims, as if that's some kind of get out. I would point to the shooter's manifesto in San Diego, where the shooter specifically says, Piers, in the manifesto, I don't hate Muslims, I hate Islam. It's the same get out that even mass murderers are using.
Yeah, because my point is always I hate extremists. I don't care if they're Muslim extremists or Christian extremists.
So do I.
Or any extreme, or Jewish extremists. There are, some of the activities we're seeing on the West Bank right now are the worst kind of extremist terrorism. Right?
The Israeli finance minister said yesterday he's going to ethically cleanse an entire Palestinian town.
Yeah, I saw it. You know my view of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. I think they're genuinely evil people. When someone is given, as Ben-Gvir was recently, a 50th birthday present from his own wife, which has a noose on a cake, right? You're dealing with psychopathic mentality. And I don't care who doesn't want to hear that, you are. And if it was the other side, if you were seeing Hamas commanders do that, people would say, look at them, they're psychopaths. So I think you've got to be intellectually honest about this. Talking of which, we did a bit of research into hate crimes targeting people for their religious beliefs. In 2025, the FBI said that nearly 70% of US religion-based hate crimes targeted Jews. So, and in October 2023, FBI Director Christopher Wray in the Biden administration warned the US was reaching historic levels of anti-Semitism. He said although Jews make up only 2.4% of US public, they account for about 60% of all religious-based hate crimes, which was nearly a 10% increase at the time. And in the UK, the Home Office said hate crimes against Muslims are almost twice as likely to result in prosecution than those against Jews. So there's a lot of statistics here which, when you take them together, would suggest that there is more hate crime against Jews than there is against Muslims. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I'm not trying to play a victim Olympics here. I think there are far too many hate crimes across the board. I'm on the left, Piers. I don't like hate crimes in general. I'm worried about the rise of the far right, and I'm worried about hatred and bigotry. I'm not happy that Donald Trump pardoned a guy who wore a Camp Auschwitz T-shirt to January the 6th, and now that guy might be able to get millions of dollars of tax money from a slush fund that Donald Trump just created. So I'm against pardoning anti-Semitic rioters. I'm against being soft on anti-Semitic criminals. I don't think two things are inconsistent, though, Piers, which is to say, number one, there's a lot of anti-Semitic hate crimes out there, right? I've written about them. There were two horrific synagogue attacks under Donald Trump's first presidency, if you remember, by far-right activists, not by far-left activists. But at the same time, we should also acknowledge, gladly, that at least we take anti-Semitism seriously as a society, as a media, as a country. No one would say that the governments of the countries are not taking it seriously. Donald Trump has set up multiple anti-Semitism investigations, task forces. Republicans in Congress have held, I think, a dozen hearings on anti-Semitism. Do you know how many they've held on Islamophobia? None. Not a single specific hearing on Islamophobia. So it's not about who's prosecuted more, who's attacked more. We agree that many communities are taking the brunt of it. Jews, the oldest hatred, are facing lots of anti-Semitism. What Muslims are upset about is that anti-Muslim hatred is mainstreamed and normalized in this country in a way that anti-Semitism or anti-black racism or homophobia is not mainstreamed.
Well, also, there's
that's what people are upset about.
Right. There's also a kind of weird campaign, I think, to dispute that Islamophobia even exists as a thing, right? Which I haven't heard anybody argue about anti-Semitism or racism or any of the other things. No. It's almost like there are up to 2 billion Muslims on planet Earth. Islamophobia is a thing. I see it all the time on social media where people don't object to parts of the Islam faith or teachings. They hate Muslims and they make no bones of it. That is Islamophobia. And, and my argument with someone like Tommy Robinson, who says, well, I've got Muslim friends and so on, but he only ever posts on his social media feed crimes that are committed largely by Muslims. That's his thing. So he's telling millions of people all the time that there's just this big problem with Muslims committing despicable crimes. And yet when I have people on who want to support him, I say, yeah, but the vast majority of crime in the UK, for example, including sex crimes against women, is perpetrated by white men. Statistically, it's just a fact. And then they get into, percentages and pro rata and all that kind of thing. And it's not an illegitimate... These aren't illegitimate things to point out.
There's a bigger issue even...
But it's exaggerated for a reason.
You and I have debated the rape issue. You and I have debated the rape issue. And one thing I would say, without wanting to relitigate all of that, is what's even worse than the whole argument about are you overrepresented, underrepresented, is Even when we talk about rape gangs, we say Islamic rape gangs, Pakistani Muslims. Which other crime do we define by religion? Do you imagine if I came on this show and I said Bernie Madoff, the Jewish financier who ripped people off during the financial crisis, you would say that's anti-Semitic, legitimately so. We don't, we never define crimes by religion except when it's a Muslim.
Well, it's true, because if I asked Tommy Robinson,
the Muslim terrorist.
Yeah, no, I agree. So if Tommy Robinson came on here, and he won't for reasons that are obvious, because he doesn't want to have to repeat his lies, which got him into prison, because he knows I'd test him and then he'd go back to prison. But if he did, I'd say, look, of all the white male sex crimes against women perpetrated in the UK each year, how many are perpetrated by white Christians? Right? He would have no idea. He wouldn't know. So that's to your point. But you start talking about any crimes perpetrated by Muslims, he'd have all the statistics he could possibly want to have. Also, in other words, he's willfully blind to the fact that there could be any crime committed by
he's
white
a bigot,
Christians.
Piers. You're being very polite. He's a bigot. And when you're a bigot, you focus only on one thing. When you're an anti-Semitic bigot, you focus on Jews. When you're an anti-Muslim bigot, you focus on Muslims. By the way, can we just deal with this issue that I hear guests on your show often say, oh, Islamophobia. You can't have a phobia. That's a fear. It's a made-up word. Even though we're totally fine saying homophobia, that doesn't mean you literally fear gay people. I mean, it's insane the double standards people contort around language to try and justify their bigotry. People say, well, I'm not against Muslims. I'm against Islam, the religion. Yet people I deal with, they never want to debate the prophethood of Muhammad with me. They never want to debate theology with me. They want to debate, as you say, gangs in England or suicide bombings in the Middle East. It's never actually about Islamic theology. Let's just be clear. This is racism. And then they say, well, it's not racism because Islam's not a race, it's a religion, even though they pick on people who look visibly Muslim. Did you know, Piers, the first person to be killed in the United States of America after 9/11 in an anti-Muslim hate crime was not Muslim. It was a Sikh man in Arizona who was wearing a turban, had a beard, and so the racist man thought he was a Muslim and killed him, Balbir Singh Sodhi. Did you know that the other day in the UK, a man raped a Sikh woman, and as he raped her, he attacked her for being a Muslim? The headlines in the British media just mentioned that she was a Sikh woman, didn't mention that it was an anti-Muslim motivated hate crime by an idiotic bigot who thought she was a Muslim woman, the poor woman.